He is currently on the run after pummeling and hospitalizing his own son. 4-year-old Kentrell Freeman was visiting his father, Kendall Freeman, for the weekend. Kentrell was promised a super fun-filled boys' weekend with his father. They were even planning on going to the Mardi Gras parade together. 4-year-old baby Kentrell accidentally urinated on himself. This sent his father into a complete rage. Kendall brutally pummeled and beat his own son. When Kendall realized he had gone too far, he took his son to the hospital. Kendall came up with excuses for his son's injuries, saying that Kentrell just fell and slipped in the tub. Kentrell is still hospitalized and cannot walk or use the bathroom without his mom's help. He even had to get emergency hip surgery. Kentrell has 2 blacked eyes, his teeth are knocked out, he has severe head injuries, he has kidney damage, he has a fractured leg, and bruises all over his body. Kendall is currently on the run from law enforcement, so please be on the lookout for him and alert authorities if you do see him. So Kendall wasn't afraid while he was beating on his own child, but now he's afraid to get punished for it. It's honestly just crazy to me. He's honestly just crazy. But what do you guys think about this case?
She starved her disabled adult daughter to death. 24-year-old Debbie Leach was a disabled woman with Down syndrome, and she lived with and was cared for by her mother, Elaine Clark. In 2019, Elaine threw a birthday party for her son, and she told family members that Debbie was in her room and didn't want to speak to anybody. Those family members didn't listen and still went to Debbie's room, and once they opened the door, they were hit with the most disgusting smell. When they looked inside, they saw dirty underwear and rotting food all over the place. Debbie was just lying on dirty bed sheets, calling out to her mother, crying in pain. Debbie's skin was sore, itchy, and covered in scabs. After seeing this, Sammy, who was Debbie's cousin, told Elaine that if she didn't do something, that Debbie was going to die. Elaine just ignored their concerns and told them that Debbie was fine. As soon as Sammy and her mother left the home, they made a report to social services, and once that report was made, Debbie's doctor was going to visit Debbie because of it. In preparation for that visit, Elaine took Debbie a shower. She put her in an oversized hoodie and took her downstairs away from the bedroom. Once Debbie's doctor arrived, he spoke with Elaine, and she spoke for Debbie the whole time. Elaine told the doctor that she didn't know what her family was talking about and that Debbie was incontinent, so that maybe she did dirty her underwear, but she would always change her in a timely manner, and that Debbie was happy, clean, and healthy. At the time, the doctor told Elaine that Debbie's skin looked dry and inflamed, but didn't have any concerns about her and would check in on her in about 2 weeks. A few days after that, a social services worker wanted to check in on Debbie. When they arrived at the home, one of Debbie's sisters opened the door, and she told the workers that they couldn't come in because Elaine wasn't home, so the sister was the one watching Debbie, which actually wasn't allowed. Debbie was never supposed to be in the care of a sibling, but since the worker couldn't go in, they just left. Later that day, Elaine called social services back and told them that Debbie was perfectly fine, but they still wanted to have a meeting. So the day that they had scheduled, Elaine put Debbie in the shower, cleaned her room up, and put her in oversized clothes. Once that worker arrived, they looked at Debbie, and she looked very underweight and skinny, but she was clean, so that was good enough for them. That social worker didn't appear to be alarmed for any reason, so they decided they were going to come back in 2 weeks to check in on Debbie. But Debbie was suffering in silence. August 29th of 2019, a 999 call was made to operators by Elaine telling them that her daughter had been sick for the past couple of days. She told them that Debbie wouldn't eat or drink and she had now passed away. The operator told Elaine to go to her daughter to see if she could resuscitate her to save her life, but she told the operator that Debbie was cold to the touch. When first responders arrived to the home, they went to Debbie's room and they found feces all over the floor and in her bed. Debbie's body was found lying in what they say an unnatural position in the middle of the floor, and there was maggots all over her body. Her face was completely encrusted in scabs and her clothes were dirty and smelly. In fact, her skin was such in a bad condition that her face was unrecognizable, and if they didn't already know who this was, it would have been hard to tell that she was a female. It was clear to investigators that Debbie was neglected and her body was sent for an autopsy. It was revealed at the time of Debbie's death, she only weighed 52 pounds and her mother neglected her for months. Elaine was arrested and sentenced to 9 years and 7 months in prison and will only have to serve up to 2/3 of her sentence before being considered to be released.
This is the Google Maps image that solved a 2-year mystery of a disappearing woman. Paulette Landrieu was an 83-year-old woman from Belgium. She was a mother of 4 and had a loving husband. Paulette was living with Alzheimer's, and I know from first-hand experience just how heartbreaking Alzheimer's can be when the person you love just becomes more and more confused and distressed. She did have some carers coming in to look after her regularly, but she would often wander around, sometimes going and knocking on her neighbours' doors, and she kind of didn't really know why. It was just because she was in this confused state. On the 2nd of November 2020, she completely vanished from her home in Aden in Belgium. Her husband saw her one minute and then she was gone the next. He was totally perplexed. He'd gone to hang up some washing outside and then she just seemed to have vanished into thin air. Nothing of any significance had happened just before she disappeared, and her family were obviously understandably confused and very heartbroken at her disappearance. Police were totally stumped. Even after a large-scale search of the area, including a helicopter and thermal cameras, there was just still no sign of Paulette. They started working on a theory that potentially, upsettingly, she might have just wandered to a local river and perished, but searches were fruitless. The case went cold and nobody had any idea of what had happened to the missing pensioner. That was until one officer decided to try and trace her last steps. He decided to get a better idea of the geography of her home by using Google Maps and clicking onto the street view. As luck would have it, he came across actual images of Paulette on the day she vanished. Cameras captured Paulette crossing the road in the direction of one of her neighbour's gardens. It was the first time Google had actually visited her road in 11 years. What are the chances of that? Armed with this information, the police decided to search that neighbour's house that was captured in the images. She was sadly found lying deceased on an embankment, presumably having fallen in a tragic accident only meters away from her home. She'd been lying there for 2 years. It's not clear why she hadn't been found and why neighbours and police hadn't found her originally, even with the thermal detectors. But the area was populated by the elderly, so it's possible that the neighbour was maybe housebound. It was by sheer luck that the car took that photo at that exact point where Paulette disappeared. She was finally able to be laid to rest.
They left an ice axe embedded into his skull after following a black teenager for no reason other than his skin color. In the summer of 2005, 18-year-old Anthony Walker was just doing something ordinary, walking in Hayton, Merseyside with his girlfriend and cousin after an evening out. He was a bright, ambitious student who had dreams of becoming a human rights lawyer, known for being kind, funny, and deeply loved in his community. But that night, Michael Barton, then 17, began shouting racist slurs at them at a bus stop. It wasn't a random conflict, it was targeted. And Anthony did what so many people try to do in moments like that. He walked away, but walking away didn't end it. Instead, the two cousins, Michael Barton and Paul Taylor, hopped into a car and followed them. They tracked Anthony, his girlfriend, and his cousin through the streets of Hayton, eventually cutting them off near McGoldrick Park. What started as racist verbal abuse turned into something far more calculated, a pursuit. In the park, the situation escalated into violence. During the attack, Paul struck Anthony in the head with an ice axe with such force that it caused catastrophic brain injuries. The weapon was left embedded in his skull. Anthony was rushed to a hospital for medical help, but he later died from his injuries. The brutality of it shocked the country, not just because of how he was killed, but because of why he was targeted in the first place. After the attack, Michael and Paul fled to Amsterdam, but they were later persuaded to return to the UK, where they were arrested and brought to trial. Both were convicted of murder and sentenced to life imprisonment. The court later set minimum terms based on their individual roles in the attack. Paul's reflecting the fatal violence he carried out, and Michael's reflecting his role in initiating the racist abuse, the pursuit, and the involvement in the attack. In 2022, Michael Barton was released on parole after serving around 17 years under strict conditions and supervision. Anthony's mother, G. Walker, made the extraordinary decision to forgive the killers publicly and went on to found the Anthony Walker Foundation to fight racism and hate crimes in her son's memory. What did you guys think about this case? Leave your thoughts in the comments below.
She claims that she was tricked into unaliving her own children. 9-year-old Jaden Howard and 6-year-old Maurice Baker Jr. live with their 32-year-old mother, Tiffany Lucas, in Shepherdsville, Kentucky. Although they did have different fathers, they lived with their mother for most of their lives. Jaden's father had passed away in 2019, but Jaden had an older brother named Daryl, and Daryl stepped in for both of those boys to act like a fatherly figure. Family members described those boys as being sweet, polite, and happy. They loved playing video games, especially with Daryl. Their mother, Tiffany's social media painted her as a devoted mother. She was always posting how much she loved her sons, calling them kings, and how proud she was to be their mother. However, there was a dark reality behind those posts. Not many people knew this, but Tiffany had an addiction problem, and she had spent a month in jail in 2018. Because of her addiction, her sons were temporarily removed from her care, but she wasn't too worried about it because she stated she knew how to game the system and always get them back. Maurice's stepmother, Michelle, stated that Tiffany always kept his father away from him and also other family members, and he wasn't allowed to go to any birthday parties or Christmas parties. Michelle also stated that Tiffany would leave the boys at home for long periods of time, and she would also leave them in the car while she was out running errands. There was multiple reports to CPS, but they told family members that there just wasn't enough evidence. A friend of Tiffany named Talia stated that Tiffany seemed like she was a caring mother, but she did have a quick temper. On Halloween, just days before the tragedy, Talia was hanging out with Tiffany and the boys, and she stated that everything seemed okay, but she did feel kind of uneasy about Tiffany's unpredictable behavior and anger. On the morning of November 8th of 2023, neighbors saw Tiffany cleaning her carpet frantically while her boys were playing in the front yard. Hours later, a neighbor noticed that Tiffany was just lying in the driveway, so that neighbor went up to her to see what was going on, and she said that her boys were inside dying. That neighbor rushed inside to see Jaden and Maurice lying on a bed covered in blood with a gun right next to them. Once police arrived at the scene, Tiffany was still in her driveway, so they went to go check in on the boys, and they were still alive, but once they made it to the hospital, they passed away. A neighbor's doorbell footage captured 4 gunshots coming from Tiffany's home, and right after that, she is running outside of the home, collapses on the ground asking for help. Tiffany was questioned, and she stated that the shooting was an accident and that she was manipulated through Facebook or Wi-Fi and that she would never harm her children unless she was told to. Tiffany appeared in court, and initially she pled not guilty. She showed no emotion or remorse, and her bail was set at $2 million. Tiffany later pled guilty to 2 counts of murder, and with each charge it could be to 20 to 50 years in prison with a possibility of life in prison, but this still has not been decided.
He SA'd and unalived a 7-year-old girl after telling her, "Don't scream or I'll hurt you." 31-year-old FedEx driver Tanner Horner pulled up to a house in his FedEx van. Tanner managed to lure 7-year-old Athena Strand into the back of his van. Tanner told Athena, "Don't scream or I'll hurt you." Surveillance footage from inside the van shows Tanner telling Athena, "You're really pretty, you know that?" Athena somehow managed to remain calm and even asked Tanner if he was a kidnapper. Audio and physical evidence indicated that Tanner had SA'd Athena from inside the van. Tanner admitted to attempting to break Athena's neck, but that didn't work. Tanner ended up strangling Athena till she was no longer alive. After Tanner was finished, he drove near a river and disposed of Athena's body. Tanner told investigators that he just kind of tossed her. Tanner claimed that his alter ego, Zero, took over his body and committed the crime. As of May 2026, Tanner has not been sentenced yet because his trial is still in the sentencing phase. The absolute audacity that Tanner has to say that his alter ego committed the crime is insane to me. But what do you guys think about this case?
This little girl disappeared in broad daylight. Years later, a man claimed that he kidnapped her, and he knew details that the public did not. Let's talk about what happened to Nylene Marshall. Nylene K. Marshall was just 4 years old and living near Clancy, Montana when she disappeared in 1983. Her mother was Nancy Marshall, and her father wasn't really involved in her life, so her mother eventually married a man named Kim Marshall, and Kim would adopt Nylene and her brother. Kim was a member of the Capital City Radio Club, and on June 25th, 1983, he brought his family to a radio operator's picnic. The picnic was in Elkhorn Mountains, which is in Helena National Park, and it was a beautiful day. The kids were having so much fun. Around 4 p.m., they were near Maupin Creek, and the other kids that Nylene was playing with got ahead of her for just a moment. But when they turned around, Nylene was just gone. There was no sign of where she had gone, and an extensive search would turn up absolutely nothing. And then they would learn something pretty disturbing. They found out that there was a man in a jogging suit in the area, and he had actually talked to Nylene and told her to follow the shadow. They were never able to identify this man, and they have no idea if he was involved in her disappearance or not. But pretty disturbing either way that he would even come up to a child and say that. That's pretty weird. Nylene's family was questioned, and Kim Marshall would actually become a person of interest, but in the reporting, there's nothing really about why or if there was anything in the investigation that stood out about him, because this case takes a bizarre turn. More than 2 years after she vanished, in November of 1985, an anonymous man began contacting missing children's organizations. It all started with phone calls to the National Missing and Unidentified Persons Systems, claiming that he took her. And then in January of 1986, a typewritten letter was sent to Child Find of America, and it was very detailed and very disturbing. They didn't put out the full letter, but what they put out is just shocking. So this person claims to be the same man that made that call in November. He said that he had picked up a little girl named Kay on a road near Elkhorn Park area, and he decided to keep her. He claimed he was raising her himself, homeschooling her, and traveling through the United States, Canada, and Great Britain with her. He even described what Nylene looked like at this point, including her height, weight, hair, and teeth. And the man said that he had a good investment income, worked from home, and homeschooled Kay. And then there were some details that were incredibly concerning. It contained information about Nylene's case that weren't known to the public. And it had disturbing claims of SA in it. He said he loved the girl and he knew her family missed her, but he couldn't let go. Authorities were able to trace the calls to phone booths around Edgerton, Wisconsin, and they were also able to determine that the letter was postmarked in Madison, Wisconsin. And then continuing with the Wisconsin trend, they also got a call about a potential sighting of her. It was a girl that looked a lot like Nylene in a restaurant in Janesville, Wisconsin. Law enforcement was never able to determine if this was true or if it was just some sick individual making up a story, because then another individual would claim that he killed Nylene and disposed of her body in a mine shaft near Helena. They would check this mine shaft though, and they would not find her there. But just an example of how people are just sick and love to make up stories to torment people. There have been other possible reported sightings through the years, including a reported sighting in New Orleans at a hospital. There was a man with a young pregnant woman who this woman said that her mother's name might have been Nylene. They were never able to confirm if this was Nylene. The woman, I guess, looked like her, and they just thought the situation was kind of strange. But they were unable to confirm anything because this couple did end up leaving the hospital. Nylene's mother, Nancy, died in Mexico in 1995. And it's another bizarre story that I could probably make a video on, to be honest. Her death has been described inconsistently in sources, but it sounds as though they said that she took her own life, but the circumstances surrounding her death were not adding up to this. As of August 2026, Nylene remains missing. She would be 47 years old today, and there are just so many questions in her case. Did somebody kidnap her from that picnic? I mean, we have a suspicious individual talking to her right before she goes missing, and then we have a letter containing all this information, and information the public doesn't have. Or was a sick individual just trying to torment people and somehow figured out these details? And did she just get lost in that forest somewhere? More than 43 years later, we do not have the answers to those questions. If you or anybody you know has any information regarding the disappearance of Nylene K. Marshall, you can contact the Jefferson County Sheriff's Office. Thank you for listening to Nylene's story. Be sure to follow for more true crime, and if you have any case recommendations, feel free to comment, directly message me, or fill out the suggested case form in my link tree in my bio.
He stepped into the shower not knowing it would be the last place he was ever seen alive, where he was violently stabbed and nearly decapitated. Travis Alexander was a 30-year-old motivational speaker in Mesa, Arizona, known for his confidence, his success, and a life that looked put together from the outside. But behind that image was a relationship with his ex-girlfriend, Jodi Arias, that never fully ended. It came back in cycles, intense, emotional, unstable, until it turned into something that neither of them could control. By June 4th, 2008, that connection wasn't just complicated anymore, it was fatal. At first, nothing seemed urgent. Travis missed calls, missed a business trip, and his friends kept trying to reach him, assuming he had already left town like planned. But as the silence stretched on, concerns started to build. And that's when the reality of what had happened began to surface. When friends finally checked on him, the house didn't give them answers right away. It gave clues. A quiet hallway, then blood, then more of it, leading deeper inside, like something had been dragged throughout the space and never stopped. It ended in the bathroom, in the shower, and inside was Travis. Inside his home, investigators would later uncover the full extent of the violence. Travis had been stabbed approximately 27 to 29 times, had his throat slashed so deeply that it nearly decapitated him, and had a gunshot wound to the head. The level of force suggested something overwhelming, an attack that didn't stop when it should have, but kept escalating until there was nothing left. But the scene wasn't the only shock. Investigators found a digital camera hidden in the washing machine, as if someone tried to erase its existence. What it held changed everything. It showed photos from earlier, ordinary moments that turned unsettling in hindsight, and one final accidental image that showed the aftermath of the attack. It wasn't speculation anymore. It was evidence. Suspicion quickly turned to Jodi. At first, she denied being there at all. Then she said she was, but claimed masked intruders killed him. Then, years later, she changed her story again, saying she acted in self-defense after abuse.
And he body slammed me again on the tile. And I remembered where he kept the gun, so I grabbed it. He was chasing me.
But all her stories clashed with the evidence that the police already had. And when she was questioned, her behavior only deepened the confusion. She cried, then steadied herself. She gave detailed explanations, then contradicted them without hesitation. It wasn't just inconsistency. It was like the story was being rebuilt in real time, and investigators weren't buying it. By 2013, the trial had become a national obsession. The evidence was laid out piece by piece. The camera, the wounds, the shifting stories, and the jury ultimately found Jodi Arias guilty of first-degree murder. The prosecution sought the death penalty, but after 2 juries failed to agree, it was eliminated. In 2015, Jodi was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. What do you guys think about this case? Leave your thoughts in the comments below.
A man walks out of a wedding reception with his wife in 1996 and then vanishes without a trace. What happened to Bob Dale? Robert Allen Dale Jr., who went by Bob, was 33 years old and lived in Sault Ste. Marie, Michigan when he disappeared in 1996. He was born and raised in Sault Ste. Marie, and he was the oldest of 4 brothers, a husband, and a father to 3 sons. He actually met his wife in high school, and they would marry shortly after. He worked as a carpenter, and he loved hunting and fishing. And according to the Find Bob Dale website, he was excited about the future and a potential job opportunity. He is described as quiet, funny, sentimental, hardworking, and deeply devoted to the people he loved. On the night of Saturday, 18th, 1996, Bob and his wife attended a wedding reception with friends and coworkers, and around 7 p.m., they would actually leave the reception to go to Monocle Lake because they were considering this as a future potential camping site, and they returned around 8:30 and continued celebrating. Later that night, sometime after 10, Bob went out to the van to rest for a little bit. Around 10:30, friends would help wake him up, and then Bob would move from the driver's seat to the passenger seat so that his wife could drive. And then at approximately 11:15, Bob and his wife left the reception. Multiple witnesses saw them traveling north on Mackinac Trail towards downtown Sault Ste. Marie, where many of the wedding guests were headed for the night. 11:15 is the final time that anyone saw him other than his wife. This is an important detail because it has been misreported many times. It was revealed years later, an officer for the Sault Ste. Marie Tribal Police was dispatched to the area of Mackinac Trail on May 18th, 1996 to 5.5 Mile Road due to a domestic dispute between a male and a female, but by the time they got there, nobody was there and the call was not filed or reported in the system. Bob's wife eventually arrived at Downtowners Tavern around 11:50 p.m., and over the years, different accounts have circulated about what Bob's wife said about where Bob was. One account was that they got into an argument and Bob walked home. One was that he was sleeping in the van, and another was that she had no idea where he was. But according to interviews done by investigators and the family, he was never seen downtown. Initially, somebody did report that they had seen him in the downtowner area, but this distinction matters because he recanted that statement later. But a lot of reporting just ate that detail up when it's not true. He was not ever seen downtown. That person recanted the statement. After arriving downtown, Bob's wife was drinking and socializing, and then around 1 a.m., she drove back home, which was about 2.5 miles away, to take the two babysitters back home. And according to the two babysitters, she never even asked, like, hey, did Bob come home? Have you seen Bob? Anything like that. But she would drop them off at home, and then she would go back to downtown. Around 2 and 2:30 a.m., a resident near 6 Mile Road and Mackinac Trail would say that there was a man and a woman in front of his house whispering about something. He has no idea what they were talking about, but it is just a weird detail in this story. By the early morning hours, Bob's wife began contacting the couple that got married, friends, and family to say that Bob was missing and asking if they knew where he was. And then she would report him missing on May 20th. Divers from the Michigan State Police and the Chippewa County Sheriff's Office would eventually search the power canal, but nothing was ever found. Bob's wife would be given a polygraph test. And like I say in every video, take this however you want. We know polygraphs are not reliable, but Bob's wife would pass her polygraph test, but then detectives would find out that she had a book on how to pass polygraph tests. So then they would give her another polygraph test and she would just pass that again. But again, just take all of that how you want. Bob's family would hire a private investigator and they would create a website, findbobdale.com, as well as a Facebook page, Find Bob Dale. This has the entire story and timeline. It has everything on it. His family runs it, and his family continues fighting for answers 3 decades later after looking for him all this time. There has been no financial activity indicating that he started a new life somewhere, and his family knows that he wouldn't just get up and leave them. As of August 2026, Robert Allen Dale Jr. remains missing, and somebody knows something. One piece of evidence could tell this family where Bob is. So if you or anybody you know has any information regarding the disappearance of Bob Dale, you can contact the Sault Ste. Marie Police Department. Thank you for listening to Bob's story. Be sure to follow for more true crime. And if you have any case recommendations, feel free to comment, directly message me, or fill out the suggested case form in my link tree in my bio.
One of the scariest movies that I've ever seen was The Conjuring 2, and I have 2 good reasons to back me up. One is because of this creepy old man and this specific scene.
My house!
But another reason why this movie is so scary to me is because it's based off of the real Enfield haunting. And that creepy old man, yeah, he was based on a real man who actually lived in the famous Enfield house years before the family moved in. He died in an armchair in the living room, and according to the Hodgson family, his spirit tormented them for 18 months while they lived in the home. I think any movie that says based on a true story is horrifying and will give me nightmares. But this one truly takes the cake, honestly, because of the real story behind it. You guys already know what time it is. Turn off the lights, grab a blanket, and let's talk about it. So, like I said, one of the scariest movies I've ever seen is The Conjuring 2. The movie follows demonologists Ed and Lorraine Warren all the way to Enfield, a borough in North London. They investigate the home and the haunting of the Hodgson family. They believe that their 11-year-old daughter is possessed by the spirit of a 72-year-old man who previously died in the home. What they weren't expecting was just how dangerous the Enfield poltergeist turned out to be. This is one of the higher rated movies in the Conjuring universe, and although nothing will beat the first one for me, this is a very close second. But the real story and family the movie is based off of is incredibly creepy. That is, if it actually happened. So this is the Hodgson family, which consists of mom Peggy and her 4 kids. Margaret, who was 13 years old at the time this took place, Janet, who was 11, Johnny, who was 10, and Billy, who was 7. In the summer of 1977, the Hodgson family was living in this house right here, 284 Green Street in Enfield, London. From the outside looking in, this looks like your typical family home where nothing bad ever happens. But one summer night, that would all change, and it would spark an 18-month-long nightmare with the unexplained. So one night, long after the kids were already in bed, Peggy heard loud crashing sounds coming from upstairs. She instantly got mad because it sounded like it was coming from her daughter's rooms, Janet and Margaret, which they shared. But it sounded like they were really roughhousing. So as Peggy marched up the stairs, ready to scold her kids, she opened the door and instead found something horrifying. Her 2 girls, Janet and Margaret, huddled in the corner of the room, scared out of their mind. They weren't making a sound, but something definitely was. And as Peggy looked around, she noticed that a dresser in the room was slamming itself against the floor, completely on its own. It eventually stopped, but once it did, the family started hearing loud knocks coming from all over the house, and there was seemingly no explanation why. So being super scared, the family ran to their next door neighbor Vic and begged him to come over to see what was going on. So he did. When Vic entered the house, he too saw the dresser moving on its own, and he also heard the loud knocks coming from all over the house and inside the walls. It sounded like something was inside and wanting to come out. The situation was terrifying enough that Peggy actually called the Metropolitan Police, and they sent out an officer to investigate the home. And what's crazy is that this officer also noticed the knocking, but that's not all they saw. The officer signed an affidavit saying they saw an armchair levitate half an inch off the ground, and then it moved about 4 feet across the floor, completely on its own. So not only did you have the family and the neighbor witness this activity, now you have an actual police officer who wrote this into their incident report. Sadly, the officer told Peggy that they couldn't help because this technically was not a legal issue, so they left, leaving the family alone in the house. Over the next 18 months, the family said that they were tormented, and the paranormal activity escalated. It started out as the kids' toys being thrown all over the room and the loud knocking all over the house, and then it got even scarier. Chairs would be overturned, they would feel cold spots in random places that also smelled like rotten flesh, pools of water would appear right in front of their eyes on the floor, matches would spontaneously ignite, and then the family began being physically attacked. The kids would levitate, and all of the paranormal activity was really centered on Janet and Margaret. This is an infamous photo from when paranormal investigators came out to the house that supposedly shows Janet levitating off the bed, but we'll get more into that in just a second. But the family would start to hear disembodied, demonic voices that sounded like they were coming out of Janet, but the only problem was that she wasn't moving her mouth. Like, this voice that came out of her was deep and scratchy, and some people think that there is no way it would have naturally come out of an 11-year-old little girl. The paranormal activity got so bad around Janet that the family actually thought that she was possessed. Like, she would go into these trance-like states and that low, scratchy male voice would come out of her. This poltergeist said its name was Bill Wilkins, and that he had gone blind, suffered a brain hemorrhage, and died in the living room chair right down the stairs, all in that creepy voice. Now, this obviously creeped the family out because why would an 11-year-old girl say those things? And also because they were just renting the home. They didn't own it, so it's not like they really knew the history of it. Or so they said. Anyway, what's crazy is that this haunting, which became known as the Enfield haunting, became known as one of the most witnessed cases of paranormal activity ever. And there's good reason for that. I mean, typically when you hear ghost stories, you only ever hear of 1 or 2 people experiencing the ghost, not a ton of people. But over the 18 months that the Hodgson family was being tormented in that house, more than 30 people in the community all witnessed the paranormal activity too. Like, this included neighbors, paranormal investigators, journalists, police, and even strangers walking by on the street. One time a stranger was walking down the road and looked up into what we now know was Janet's bedroom window, and what she saw is straight up nightmare fuel. She saw Janet hovering above her bed, almost smashing into the window. But literally everyone that stepped foot into the house, they all said they saw heavy furniture moving on its own, objects being thrown across the room, both Janet and Margaret levitating off the ground, and heard the knocking and loud noises, as well as the disembodied demon voice coming out of Janet. Like, this wasn't just a few people that witnessed it. It was basically the whole community, which is wild. Anyway, after a while of the family experiencing this and spending so many sleepless nights huddled together in the living room with the lights on, they ended up calling a popular UK publication called the Daily Mirror. They didn't know what else to do, they said, so they called the publication to come out and witness it for themselves. So they did, but hours went by with not a single thing happening. That is, until right before they started to leave. As one of the reporters got up to leave, a Lego was thrown across the room without anyone touching it, and it hit him right in the face, which left a pretty big wound. So needless to say, they wanted to continue to report on this story. The Daily Mirror ended up inviting the Society for Psychical Research, otherwise known as SPR, which is a non-profit organization that examines paranormal and psychic events. They invited them out to the Enfield home to truly investigate and see what was going on. And during their stay in the home, they said they experienced more than 2,000 incidents of paranormal activity. Everything I mentioned earlier, they heard. But one of the scarier incidents involved a curtain being tightly wrapped around one of the investigators' necks, all on its own, choking him. Some of the investigators also heard this strange whistling and barking noise coming from Janet's direction, but she wasn't the one making the noises. But in order to truly understand if this home was being haunted by a poltergeist named Bill, the Committee of the Scientific Investigation of Claims of the Paranormal, otherwise known as CSICOP, they came out to the home to conduct further investigations. They had a stakeout in the house for quite a long time, and investigators with this team set up microphones and cameras all over the house. They even had remote-controlled still cameras set up in the girls' room, which were timed to take pictures every 15 seconds. The team did end up catching the disembodied voice coming out of Janet and the loud knocking on the walls, which I'll play for you here.
Shut the door. I'm 72 years old. I come from doing rough graveyard. And I have right near the church where Rena lives. And all my friends come from there as well. And we all make a game and go to the pub. And then we thought we'd pick your house. Because I used to live here.
But then they caught something else, which nobody was planning. They caught the girls pranking them. Like, some of the demonic activity that they said was happening, Janet was actually faking and doing herself. Cameras caught Janet bending spoons and trying to bend an iron bar. And the banging that was happening in the house, the cameras caught Janet doing a lot of it. She would bang a broom handle on the ceiling, and she even hid some of the investigators' equipment. When they brought this up to Janet, she confessed and even admitted to pranking the journalists and investigators. She claimed that she faked about 2% of what was happening and played it up to make the story seem scarier than it was. But she was adamant that the rest of it was real. Because of this confession, a lot of people started doubting the Hodgson family, even the paranormal investigators and journalists. They thought, well, if they admitted to faking some, then how much of it is real? Investigators were then able to kind of explain away some of the findings with logical answers. They thought that the girls were just playing tricks and exaggerating, and that what they were experiencing was nothing more than an imaginative teenager. The camera and tape recorder malfunctions could be easily explained by simple glitches in the equipment. And the famous levitating photo of Janet, well, investigators came full circle on that. What they once thought was a girl who was possessed, they now felt like it was just Janet jumping off the bed like a trampoline. I mean, it's kind of obvious by looking at it. Like, the photos side by side don't really show levitating. And they brought up the fact that Janet was pretty athletic, so they felt like this was just her doing gymnastics and further pranking people. As for the disembodied voice known as Bill that came out of Janet, some people think it would be too hard for an 11-year-old to keep talking in such a deep and scratchy voice for hours at a time, like Janet did. But others think the male voice was just a vocal trick, that it was was Janet all along, seeing what she could get away with. Skeptics in the CSI COP said that the poltergeist voice had the phraseology and vocabulary of a child, and that it would suddenly change topics, which on the surface may not seem like a big deal, but changing topics was a habit that Janet also had. So it seemed like more and more evidence was piling up that suggested maybe this whole thing was fake, that none of the haunting actually happened. And to make matters worse, demonologists Ed and Lorraine Warren came to investigate, but not like it was shown in the Conjuring 2 movie. In fact, Ed and Lorraine only investigated the house for one day in the summer of 1978. They, of course, were convinced that the house was haunted and that Janet was possessed, but then they did something a little odd. They didn't truly investigate. They just told the other paranormal researchers that were there that, quote, that real money could be made by writing books about the incident and selling movie rights. Then they suddenly left. I've already kind of touched on how Ed and Lorraine Warren have a sketchy past and how a lot of people think they were frauds, but this just feeds into that scenario. The whole situation was kind of sus, but do with that information as you will. And the other investigators there knew that Ed was known for exaggerating, and they even said themselves that he would take a simple haunting case and turn it into demonic possession. At the end of the day, every single research team left with no real proof that the Enfield haunting was real. It was all just speculation. The general consensus is that it was made up for attention, and kind of what fed into that was some interviews done by Margaret and Janet. In one that was filmed for TV, the interviewer asked Janet, quote, "How does it feel to be haunted by a poltergeist?" End quote. In which Janet responded, quote, "It's not haunted." End quote. And then she laughed and smiled. Margaret then told her to shut up, but it's just weird. And during the interview, Janet would wave her hand in front of her mouth every single time the disembodied male voice would be heard. So at that point, it kind of all felt like a scam from the family. But this didn't stop the case from being in the news and going on to become a documentary. It got so bad that Janet said that she was bullied in school for it, and that kids would put crane flies down her back. A priest eventually visited the home in 1978. After which, the haunting was said to have died down, but the family said that it never fully stopped. Billy, the youngest child, continued to live in the Enfield house all the way up until his mom died, and he said that even then, it always felt like he was being watched. But this family went on to have such a hard life. Like I said, Peggy ended up passing away, as did their dad. Johnny ended up dying of cancer at just 14 years old, and one of Janet's own kids later on in life ended up passing away in his sleep at just 18 years old. They did not have a very easy life, which is sad. After the Hodgson family moved out, a new family moved into the home. It was a woman named Claire and her 4 sons, and they too agreed that it always felt like they were being watched. The kids would be woken up in the middle of the night to voices coming from downstairs, and the final straw was when one of the boys woke up in the middle of the night to a man running into his room, but the man was not there. The family moved out the very next day, and they'd only stayed in the house for 2 months. The only thing that doesn't really make sense to me is that although this is proven to be somewhat of a hoax, that doesn't explain how so many people in the community, even a police officer, witnessed the paranormal activity themselves. Like, it wasn't just the family, it was over 30 people. And then what creeps me out even more is that years later, the unexplained demonic voice that came out of Janet was played on a radio talk show as part of discussing the case. And a listener of the show came forward and said something horrifying. They identified the voice as their late father, William Wilkins, or as he liked to be called, Bill. The listener said that Bill lived in the Enfield home years before the Hodgson family, and that in 1963, he had gone blind, suffered a hemorrhage, and died in the armchair in the living room, which, if you remember, is exactly what Janet had said when she was possessed. So it's weird to me that Bill Wilkins actually existed and really lived in the home, and how more than 30 people witnessed the paranormal phenomena. But at the same time, it's been debunked as a hoax. I guess it's totally possible that the family knew that Bill really died in the house and just lied about it. But still, it doesn't really explain everything else. All I know is that this case went on to inspire one of the creepiest movies I've ever seen. The Conjuring 2. Now, a lot of that movie was played up and didn't actually happen, but I am still a fan. I don't know. What do you guys think? There is so much evidence suggesting that this was all a hoax, but I don't know. I love a good creepy ghost story, so I'm torn. But it's now been 49 years, and although the Enfield house still stands and is lived in by others, what really happened inside those walls remains a mystery.
Strap in for a wild murder triangle case with a couple of twists and turns you will not expect. It was the 28th of June 2014. Erin Corwin was only 19 years old, living in California. She was a beautiful girl who was married to her childhood sweetheart. This was US Marine Jonathan. The pair had met when they were in middle school and they got engaged when they were still at high school. They were that sure about each other. They married in 2012 and a year later, Jonathan was stationed in the Marines in California. Their family and friends described them as inseparable. Everybody just knew they were meant to be together. It's like a real-life Disney love story, except nobody had any idea it would turn into a real-life horror film. The couple moved to beautiful 29 Palms together and they seemed happy to the outside world, but I feel like we could all say it together at this point. Things are not always as they seem behind closed doors. Things worked out really well at first and they even met another young couple on the military base. The couple in question were Christopher and Nicole Lee. Now they actually had a very similar story to Erin and Jonathan. They were also childhood sweethearts, except these two had a 6-year-old daughter together. It kind of seemed like the stars had aligned for these two couples to meet, really lean on each other and just be great friends. They even helped each other out when things were tough. Erin offered to babysit for the little girl occasionally if Christopher and Nicole struggled to get a babysitter. Erin really loved children. She was desperate to be a mum and heartbreakingly had previously suffered miscarriages. For her, looking after this little girl was like second nature. The couples grew closer and closer, but behind closed doors, Erin and Christopher began getting too close. What started as just a friendly relationship became a full-blown affair. The pair started talking about being together and how much of a great stepmom Erin would be to the little 6-year-old. She already looked after her load, so it was kind of like, in this weird way, a bit of a trial run. But predictably, Christopher's wife ended up catching on, and one night she checked his phone. She found out all about the affair and they had a huge argument, obviously, and she actually went round to Erin and Jonathan's house to confront them. Well, Jonathan had no idea, and this was exactly when he found out that his wife was sneaking around behind his back. At this point, Nicole threatened Erin. She said to stay away from her husband forever. But a couple of weeks later, in June 2014, there was another bombshell. Erin found out she was pregnant, but who was the father? Despite the confusion about the paternity of the child, Erin was excited. Like I said, she'd always wanted to be a mum. Now, she was kind of hoping that it was Christopher's baby. She really wanted to be with Christopher. However, both Christopher and Erin were married to other people. On the 28th of June that year, Christopher told his wife Nicole that he was going to Joshua Tree State Park. Erin also told her husband that she was going to Joshua Tree State Park. In fact, this was no coincidence. Christopher had told Erin that he had a surprise for her, and she actually thought he was going to propose. By that evening, Erin had still not returned home, and Jonathan was getting really concerned. He reported her missing to police, and fairly promptly a huge search began. They were praying that maybe Erin was just lost and she needed locating and she would come home safe and sound. They had no luck finding her, and immediately Jonathan was this prime suspect as the partner. But he had a rock-solid alibi. Loads of people had been with him that day, loads of his colleagues at the base, so they knew that he'd not done anything to her. And Jonathan told police about the affair that had been going on, so naturally police then wanted to speak to Christopher. Fairly suspiciously, Christopher tried to play down the amount that he knew Erin. He basically made out like they barely even knew each other, they were just neighbours. Police knew this was a massive red flag. Meanwhile, the hunt for Erin was frustratingly fruitless. Weeks had passed and even hundreds of volunteers were unable to locate her. Tip-off then came into police about Christopher and how he'd been oddly into mine shafts and kind of researching them. So officers decided to take a look down some, and lo and behold, they found Erin's body. She'd been strangled to death and thrown to the bottom. Alongside her body, they found a homemade torch, which was basically a top wrapped around a stick, and they were able to send that off for DNA. And guess whose DNA was all over it? Christopher's. Meanwhile, Christopher and his family had packed everything up and very swiftly left and moved to Alaska. But evidence was mounting up. They found Erin's abandoned vehicle, and the tire tracks near to it matched Christopher's vehicle. Christopher was finally arrested, but he had a disturbing story to tell officers. He admitted to the killing, but he said that he'd acted the way he did because Erin had confessed to molesting his daughter. He stated, "I was controlled by the anger, the hate I felt that day. It was something I never want to experience again." But this was a lie. Christopher was basically clutching at straws, trying to find any way he could to justify murdering her. In one final strange twist, the coroners could not actually confirm or deny that Erin was pregnant. It wasn't known whether maybe she'd lost the baby or maybe she'd lied about it to maybe give Christopher an ultimatum. In the end, Christopher was found guilty and sentenced to life in prison.
This is a 33-year-old elementary school teacher that was SAing her 12-year-old son's best friends. This is a very sick and wild case that unfortunately involves multiple underage students that weren't just friends with her own child, but were also students at the elementary school that she worked for. Anna Marie Crocker lived in Salem, Wisconsin with her family. She got married young and had 4 children with her husband David and was a stay-at-home mom. But Anna Marie always dreamed of working with children. So in 2020, Anna Marie got a job working at Riverview Elementary School that taught students ranging in ages from 5 years old to 14 years old, and 3 of her 4 kids actually went to the school that she worked for. In 2024, 33-year-old Anna Marie is still working at the same elementary school, but now she's a full-time teacher's aide. It's also around this time that Anna Marie starts becoming very creepy around her 12-year-old son's friends. She was always trying to hang out with them when they would come over. She was trying to almost act like she was their age. She would also be very inappropriate, like trying to flirt with these 12, 13-year-old boys. In January of 2024, her 12-year-old son had a sleepover party with a bunch of his friends at their house. And when all of the kids went to bed, Anna Marie crept over to where one of her 12-year-old son's friends were sleeping. Names of all of the children in this case have not been released to the public, so we're going to call this child James. And James was only 12 years old. Anna Marie wasn't wearing anything when she got on top of the 12-year-old sleeping James. She then took off his clothing and fully SA'd him, and that's how 12-year-old James woke up. He immediately starts freaking out and screaming at Anna Marie to get off of him, and this wakes up the rest of his friends. So Anna Marie tries to get up and run away, but she's not wearing anything, and the boys actually catch her and fully see her, including her own son. And that night, James confided in all of his friends, including Anna Marie's son, what Anna Marie just did to him. But when he went home the next morning, he did not tell his family. Anna Marie then starts targeting another one of her 12-year-old son's friends, a 14-year-old boy that we will call Drew. Anna Marie added Drew on Snapchat and was sending him a bunch of photos and videos, and also requested that he send her the same kind of videos. In August of 2024, Anna Marie picks up 14-year-old Drew and drives him to a parking lot so she can SA him in her car. And she does fully SA 14-year-old Drew before he changes his mind and pushes her off of him, and then the next day he blocked her on Snapchat. But what Anna Marie did not know at the time was that Drew secretly recorded the entire assault on his phone. Anna Marie then moves on and targets her 3rd and her 4th victim. They are both 13-year-old boys, and yes, both of these boys are also friends with her 12-year-old son, and all of these children are all students at the elementary school that she works for. She adds both of these boys on Snapchat, and then she sends both of these 13-year-old boys pictures and videos, but they both block Anna Marie almost right away because they were scared of her, because they both already knew what she did to their friends already. But right before her 4th victim blocked her, he tried to remind Anna Marie, who's 33 years old, that he is only 13 years old, and she replied saying, "Yeah, I like that." It is now October of 2024, only 10 months after Anna Marie started SAing her son's friends that were also students at the elementary school that she worked at. And rumors are spreading around the school that Mrs. Crocker is SAing different students. And she responds to this by harassing, stalking, and blackmailing her victims. She starts harassing 12-year-old James and 14-year-old Drew, blowing up their phones, insulting them, and actually accusing both of them of essaying her. Anna Marie hears rumors at school that there's a video that 14-year-old Drew has of him and Anna Marie in the car. She texts Drew a bunch of insults. It's really, really long. You should definitely go check it out. Most of it I probably couldn't even say on here, but it's absolutely insane. But she's pretty much telling this 14-year-old boy to get over her, stop lying, and she's too hot for him and out of his league anyway. Anna Marie also eggs his family home, a 33-year-old wife, mother, and teacher. To also further humiliate and blackmail 14-year-old Drew, Anna Marie befriends a 15-year-old girl that goes to the same school as Drew because he's now in high school. And she tells this 15-year-old girl that Drew is the one harassing and stalking her and that he actually essayed her. She also sends this 15-year-old girl a video that Drew sent her, so now she's spreading CSAM to other minors. And this comes up again in just a minute because this is actually how Anna Marie gets caught. But before that finally happens, Anna Marie finds a fifth victim. This boy was a little bit older, but he was still a minor. He was the 16-year-old older brother of one of her 12-year-old son's friends. And she met him at the school's homecoming day parade where she's one of the teachers and he's one of the students. She texts him, "Hey, how old are you?" He responds that he's 16. She says, "Oh, cool. I'm a 33-year-old teacher from the elementary school." She then tells him how hot she thinks he is and that she wants to be intimate with him, but she uses much more colorful language. And she fully makes plans to also SA this boy the upcoming weekend on October 11th, 2024, but luckily she never gets the chance. Because on October 9th, that 15-year-old girl that Anna Marie friended so she could further blackmail Drew actually confronted Drew at school for what he did to Mrs. Crocker because she thinks that he essayed her, even though we know it's the other way around. And this was overheard by different people at the school, and this actually finally got the attention from school staff. The school calls Drew's parents, and Drew finally tells people what Anna Marie did to him, but not just him, his friends, her other victims. Drew's mom calls 12-year-old James's mom, Anna Marie's first known victim that she essayed during that sleepover. And when James's mom confronted her son with this, James was so nervous and scared he actually threw up, but he did tell his mom the truth. Finally, Anna Marie Crocker was fired from her job, but she was also arrested, and then her other victims started coming forward, and she was facing a lot of charges and a lot of jail time. Anna Marie Crocker would try and make a lot of excuses for her actions, saying that she still felt like a kid because she got pregnant really, really young and became a mom young. She would also try to argue that she was temporarily insane while she was preying and assaulting multiple different minors because she was drinking a lot at the time. Total BS. But Anna Marie would eventually plead guilty, so luckily her victims could avoid a trial. The courts actually seemed to finally hold a female predator fully responsible for their actions because Anna Marie Crocker was sentenced to over 50 years in prison, and she won't be eligible for parole until she's 85 years old. I feel like whenever I talk about cases like this, there's so many comments that try to undermine the male victim's trauma in these cases. This is absolutely no different than if a 33-year-old male teacher was essaying his 12-year-old daughter's friends. There's absolutely no difference at all. I wish all the victims in this case all of the healing and support, and I wish the exact same for the 4 children of Anna Marie Crocker because I'm sure this was very traumatic for them as well. Let me know all your thoughts in the comments, but please be respectful, and I will see you guys all next time in my next video. Please be a good person to your fellow person.
Becky Watt's first proper clear word as a child was the name Nathan. She said that to her big stepbrother who she adored. Years later though, that same Nathan would be the reason why she vanished from her own home one day. This is the story of Becky Watts, a girl who had already been through so much for her young age and what happened to her at the hands of her stepbrother. Rebecca Marie Watts was born on the 3rd of June 1998. By the age of 3, she was living full-time in her dad's custody with her her stepmom Angie in St George's in Bristol. Angie, her stepmom, had a son called Nathan from a previous relationship, and he obviously became her stepbrother. As a child, Becky absolutely adored her big brother. That's what I said earlier, her first word was his name. Becky was described as a girl who was very shy and very timid when it came to being around new people or people that she didn't know. However, at home and in front of her friends and family, she was a very confident girl. However, when she reached secondary school, her life became a lot harder. She was actually bullied, and she was bullied specifically about her weight. She experienced name-calling, bullying and teasing from her schoolmates. Also, later on, the family realised that unkind comments were coming from her stepbrother Nathan at home as well. By the age of 13, Becky had already developed an eating disorder because of everything that she was experiencing. Her weight dropped to less than 6 stone. She started to refuse to go to school, and she became so anxious, and her dad actually described her anxiety as crippling. Having been through what I describe as crippling anxiety before, I honestly feel so much for her, because especially feeling that at such a young age is just heartbreaking. She later would experience help through the hospital and education services, and her dad calls this period of time, quote, very dark times. The family almost lost her to her illness. That is how unwell she became. However, I am happy to say that with the support from her dad Darren and her stepmom Angie, and all the medical support that she received, Becky actually recovered. She put weight back on, and she slowly got her confidence back. Her interests then changed to fashion, shoes and makeup. She loved spending time with her friends, and she was always talking to them online on social media. She started going out more, and she actually had a boyfriend at this time. By early 2015, Becky had turned 16. She was happier, she was making plans, she was going out and just really starting to enjoy life. She had got away from those dark times that she was experiencing, and almost experiencing what it was like to be a normal teenager without all of these problems. Friends remembered her as loyal, smiley, feisty and caring. The day before she disappeared, she actually spent time at a friend's house playing game, laughing, and she even texted her boyfriend that night saying, "I love you so much." This is not the characteristics of a person who's going to run away and going to go missing. On the morning of Thursday, the 19th of February 2015, her stepmother Angie had left for a hospital appointment. Her stepmother actually suffered from a condition called MS, multiple sclerosis, so she had a lot of medical appointments all the time. At the time, it was told that at this point, Becky was home alone. She sent her last text at 11:03am, and then she was just gone. When Angie returned home from her hospital appointment, Becky wasn't there. The family had just assumed that she'd gone out though, probably either out with her friends or her boyfriend enjoying herself. However, by the time it came to the next afternoon, it was clear that this was completely out of character, and it was at this point that Darren phoned the emergency services and reported his daughter Becky as missing. A massive search began as soon as she was reported missing. It was one of the largest missing persons operations that the local force had ever run. Friends, family and strangers were walking the streets. Posters went up and appeals were done on the news. Becky's dad and her grandmother actually publicly begged her to come home. It is a heartbreaking appeal if you want to go and watch it. Her stepbrother Nathan and his girlfriend Shauna, they stayed close to the family the whole time. They occasionally helped with the search and they sat in the house. They said that they had no idea where she was while the full city was looking for this missing girl. Her family was hoping that maybe she was just spending time with friends, or maybe she just needed some time alone, but days passed with absolutely no sign of her. Becky's phone stayed silent. Her dad was constantly calling her, trying to get a hold of her. Nobody had seen her leave the house. Friends had said that she was happy and relaxed the night before she went missing. Her boyfriend was constantly phoning her phone trying to reach her. The family was just living in a total nightmare of not knowing what had happened to their little girl. They would obviously be imagining every possible horrendous possibility, however still having hope that she was going to walk through the door. Behind the scenes, the police were gathering evidence. They were looking into people all around Bristol, not just strangers but also family members. They were going through CCTV, phone records and forensic traces. On February 28th, 9 days after Becky vanished, officers arrested Nathan Matthews, her stepbrother, and his girlfriend Shona Hoare. The family waited and the search was continuing. Now, before we go any further, let's talk about Nathan though. Who was he and what was he actually like? Nathan had grown up with his grandmother. His dad had abandoned him and his mum had sent him to live with his gran. I'm not 100% sure why, I couldn't really find out that information, but regardless, he lived with his gran growing up. At one point in his life, he was in the Territorial Army. He was somebody who would kind of appear to be organised and in control, but when police searched the home that he shared with Shona on Cotton Mill Lane, the reality was something that they could never have expected. The house can only be described as a severe hoarder's house. There was piles of junk, clothes, broken furniture and bags just filling the room from top to bottom. I will put some of these on the screen, but officers genuinely could barely get through some of the doorways. The house absolutely stank of cat feces as well. The downstairs living area was almost completely unusable. There was dishes piled halfway up the walls. They actually had a microwave, a toaster and a kettle in their bedroom along with a mini fridge, because you could tell by the pictures that kitchen is not usable. Nathan would later admit that he was the main hoarder and that, quote, the clutter drove Shona mad. I do not know how you could personally stay with somebody that lived in a mess like this. I can only assume that by where we're going in this story that she was being manipulated, but I just could not be with somebody that was living like this. Out of everything though within this house, one thing stood out more than anything: the bathroom. In a house that was completely filthy, dirty and filled with junk, the bath and the tiles around it were completely clean and shiny, as if they had been recently bleached or cleaned. There was a little scouring pad used for cleaning that was actually found at the bottom of the bath as well, and detectives later said that that clean bath in the middle of this absolute junkyard of a house was one of the first things that felt wrong in this case. There was also a receipt found within the house that raised an alarm with investigators. Nathan had recently purchased a circular saw, gloves, goggles, masks and cleaning materials in the day after Becky disappeared. That straight away just does not look good. The combination of that strangely clean bath in a hoarder's house along with those purchased items shifted the investigation from a missing persons case to something so much darker. Between the 2nd and 3rd of March, almost 2 weeks after Becky was last seen, the police made a horrific discovery. Following information that was given by Nathan, officers found her remains hidden in a shed just 80 metres from their house. Nathan and Shona's house, by the way, not the family home. Nathan had actually written a statement, and cowardly while it was being read out, he sat with his hands in his ears as if he didn't want to hear it. After Nathan's statement, the truth emerged, and this is his version of events. On the morning of the 19th of February of 2015, while his mum was at an appointment, Nathan and Shona had gone to the family home where Becky lived with, quote, a kidnap kit. This kit included handcuffs, tape, masks and a stun gun. Becky had been attacked and killed in her own bedroom. The body had been taken to their home, later dismembered in that bath, packaged in cling film and moved to a shed, the one that was near their house. Nathan actually admitted killing her in this attack, but said it was an accident during a plan to scare her. The prosecution though actually argued that this was a sexually motivated kidnap that became murder. Shona originally denied knowing anything about the killing or what happened after. The case went to trial in November of 2015 at Bristol Crown Court. The judge found Nathan Matthews guilty of murder and his girlfriend Shona guilty of manslaughter. Both of them were also convicted of conspiracy to kidnap, perverting the course of justice, preventing a lawful burial and also being in possession of stun guns. On the 13th of November that same year, Nathan was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum of 33 years and Shona received 17 years. I'm pretty sure she has actually been released now. I will need to double check that and I will put that on the screen. There was 2 other people involved in this. I think it was friends of Nathan who actually helped to hide the remains, also received shorter prison sentences. This case honestly just makes me so angry. Nathan had such a long jealous history of Becky. He hated the fact that her and his mum got on so well and he never had that upbringing. But why would you not just try and deal with those issues? Why would you take away a younger girl's life, especially a young girl who has also dealt with bullying and an eating disorder by the age of 13. The fact that he also was one of the perpetrators that decided to bully her just also makes me feel physically sick. That's somebody you should be looking out for and protecting, your little stepsister, but no, he took her away in the most disgusting way possible. She never got to finish growing up. The first word that she ever said became the person that took her from this world. Let me know if you've heard about this case and what your thoughts are. If you have any other case suggestions, please leave them down below. Look after yourself, and I will see you in the next one.
On May 7th of 2007, a man was at home working on setting up a baby monitor for his baby. He couldn't figure out how to hook it up. He was having technical difficulties. He's messing around trying to figure it out when suddenly an image shows up on the monitor. But the man did not recognize the boy on the screen. It wasn't his baby and it wasn't his house. On the screen was a little boy lying on the floor, unclothed, looking very, very unwell, tied up like a prisoner, eating what looked to be scraps off of the floor. The man is thinking, this looks like a scene from a scary movie. There's absolutely no way that this is real. He brings in his wife. He shows her. They realize the monitor is picking up a live feed from somewhere else, probably likely from a house nearby. And the reality behind that little boy was way worse than you could ever imagine. Quick pause for an intro. The mic is back by popular demand, although I almost didn't bring it back because, guys, my nails aren't done and I'm embarrassed. This is why I'm holding it like this. Should I show you? It's pretty bad. Okay, look, you can't take a screenshot though. That's enough. I'm also in a really weird mood because I started 75 hard. I don't know why people do this. I'm miserable. My body hurts and I've never craved a sweet treat more in my whole entire life. This is silly. Anyway, this story has to be one of the craziest ones that I've ever researched. That being said, I do have to give a warning. This video does include children, which can be a really sensitive topic. So if you think that that's going to harm your mental health in any way, please skip this video and I will see you in my next one. Love you. The Malrova family. This happens in the Czech Republic. This is the case that the movie The Orphan was inspired by, if it gives you any sort of idea of what we're going to be speaking about today. The family consisted of Clara and her two young sons. Their father left the picture pretty early on. Years later, Clara, along with the two boys, moved in with her sister, Katerina. But let's take it back to where it all started. How did we get here? Clara and her older sister, Katerina, were born and raised in the Czech Republic. They did have a third sister who was the middle child. Clara was the youngest, Katerina was the oldest. They grew up in a very religious household, and when they were teenagers, Clara and Katerina began having dreams and visions from a higher power informing them that they were the chosen ones. We've heard this before. But said dreams and visions were not good, and it was even worse that the sisters truly believed them. I will give you an example. One time, Claire was told in a dream or in a vision that she had healing powers. To test that, she was found attempting to suffocate her sister Katerina with a pillow, only because she wanted to be able to prove that if her sister successfully passed away, Clara would be able to bring her back to life using her powers, which is very extreme. If she wanted to show off her powers, maybe she could have started flying or something. I don't know. No need to literally end someone's life and then bring them back to life. It's quite unnecessary, but that is how much they believed in their powers. In the mid-90s, Claire was 18 years old. She had drifted away from her family at this point. She really had no contact with any of them. She meets a man, she falls in love, she marries him. At 20 years old, she gives birth to their first son, and 2 years later, they have their second son. Her life was fine. She was actually said to be a good, caring mom, which will be hard to believe, but I guess she was. So she was doing fine until she turned 26, and these dreams and these visions started to come back stronger than ever before. She really believed that she was chosen by God and destined to go on a mission from God. She started to see her children and her husband in a very negative light because she thought that they were distracting her from said mission. They were in the way. The husband quite literally just could not take Claire's delusions anymore, so he left. He's out of the picture. Clara keeps her two sons and she reconnects with her sister Katerina. They all move in together. Although Clara was what you would call delusional, she did take care of the boys. They were showered, they were bathed, they were fed, they were cared for, and they were loved. However, all of that would change. Katerina and Clara worked together at a daycare center where they would watch over children. One day, Katerina approaches Clara and says, "We have a new child, a 13-year-old girl named Anika that goes by Anna. She is from Norway. She is an orphan. She has a very troubled childhood. She has been through a lot of horrible traumatic things in her past. She has no parents. She has leukemia, cancer, and she's not expected to live past the age of 16. She needs us. She needs someone to adopt her because she needs help." After hearing about her past, Clara feels bad for Anna and she agrees to adopt her immediately. She wanted to help her. By September of 2005, Clara has legally adopted Anna. They are now all living together as a family of 5. Clara, her sister Katerina, Claire's 2 sons, and now Anna. But because Anna has leukemia, she's seeing a doctor for her treatments. I say doctor because we don't really know who this person was, but I can tell you he was no doctor. At least I have suspicions that he wasn't, and I think you might have the same suspicions, but Clara, Anna's legal guardian, never took Anna to her treatments ever. She never saw this doctor, never met the doctor, never spoke to the doctor on the phone, but Clara would receive text messages from this doctor.
doctor. Anna's doctor would tell Clara things to do to care for Anna. The doctor would instruct Clara to give Anna a lot of love and affection, an excessive amount of it because she was in need of it. He would tell Clara to buy Anna presents to make her feel loved. He would tell Clara that she had to give Anna daily massages, full body massages, and I mean full body, including intimate areas. The doctor told Clara that she was to do this every single night before bed, and she did. Clara would do this every single night. The massages would sometimes last as long as 8 hours. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 hours. So the situation was very uncomfortable, for a lack of a better word, and it only made things worse that Anna demanded these things from Clara. This 13-year-old little girl was bossy, and on top of that, Anna did not like Clara's 2 other children, the boys. She would try to turn Clara against her 2 sons, and it would work. Clara stopped taking care of her boys, stopped taking care of herself, spent so much time dedicated to taking care of Anna, and in the process of it, she was becoming a shadow of a person. It really was the strangest thing. Anna seemed to know exactly how to manipulate Clara. She had a very mature way of psychologically torturing people to get what she wanted, almost as if she had a more developed way of thinking, almost as if she wasn't a young 13-year-old girl. That is because, you guessed it, she was not. Anna was no 13-year-old girl with cancer. Anna was a 33-year-old woman named Barbara Skrolova. I want to say that's how you pronounce the last name, manipulating everyone around her to pretend to be a child. Yeah, so let's take it back to 1974 when Barbara was born. She was born and raised in the Czech Republic with her parents and her 2 siblings. Her upbringing was rough. She was diagnosed with a few things such as dissociative identity disorder and schizophrenia, as well as, I'm gonna botch this word really bad, hypopituitarism. Basically, that means that a specific gland in her body did not make enough growth hormones, which is why and how she was able to pose as a child when in reality she was a 33-year-old adult. This is my point of view and my opinion as to how we get to where we do. Barbara's parents as a child did not give her attention, and as an adult, because she looked like a child, she was treated like one, and she hated that. So to get revenge on adults and additionally to get the attention that she so craved, she decided that she would pretend to be a child, to be an orphan, to get adopted to a nice loving family, because her using her diagnosis in a way that benefited her and made her feel like she was the one in control, that was satisfying to her. So that's exactly what she did. She actually tried to do it twice before successfully doing it to Clara, but the first time during the adoption process, the truth was revealed. She was admitted to a psychiatric hospital for obvious reasons, but she escaped. She tried to do the same thing again. She was sent back to the psychiatric hospital by her parents and authorities, and she spent some time there, but then was released. When she was released, she met Katerina, Clara's sister. When Barbara met Katerina, she introduced herself as her true self, Barbara, an adult, who was in her 30s, but one day, all of a sudden, Barbara tells Katerina about this thing that she likes to do. She says, I have this thing. I sometimes like to pretend to be a child, and I like to get adopted, and I would like to do that again now, so can you help me? And for whatever reason, Katerina has her own issues, obviously. She says, sure, let's do it. Actually, I know the perfect person that can adopt you, my little sister Clara. So Barbara, I keep accidentally kissing the mic. So Barbara and Katerina come up with this perfect plan. They come up with the name Anika, nickname Anna. They make up this backstory of this character that they were essentially creating. Backstories of this troubling childhood of cancer, fake cancer, an entire story that had to be sad enough for Clara to feel so bad that she would feel as if she had no other option but to adopt her. As we know now, it worked. It had worked so far for a year. It is 2006 now. Clara, Katerina, Barbara, who is Anna, and Clara's 2 sons have all now been living together for a little bit over a year. Barbara has successfully turned Clara against her 2 boys who are currently 7 years old and 9 years old, and Barbara is able to convince Clara to not only neglect her 2 sons, but also to start treating them as if they were not even human beings. We have another twist in the story. Yes, every time you think that this can't get worse, it does. Barbara, Anna, has something seriously wrong with her, we know that, but the apple does not fall far from the tree. Barbara's father also has severe issues. He is the leader of a cult. In this cult that he runs are various members, including Barbara, Barbara's little brother, and Katerina. Barbara and Katerina brainwash Clara, and she joins the cult. And keep in mind throughout this whole thing that Barbara in Clara's mind is still this poor little sick 13-year-old girl with cancer, and this poor little girl who has basically lured her into her family cult convinces her that she still needs to do a lot of work to discipline her 2 children, and Clara decides to take that advice. She agrees, and she takes her 2 sons to this camp in the middle of nowhere that is ran by the cult for them to be shown how to behave, basically. In that camp, those 2 children are treated with such brutality that it is even hard for me to comprehend, and warning, it is very, very, very hard to listen to. The boys were kept in animal cages where they would be starved. They were forced to wear collars. If they were not in their cages, that sentence does not even seem right for me to say out loud, but if they weren't in their cages, they would be tied up to something. They were only ever let out of their cages to be punished. The punishments included putting bags over their head and using different kind of objects such as leather belts to physically harm them, amongst a million other different things. Cult members also told Clara that for her boys to become good human beings, Clara would need to cut off a little piece of their flesh. Every member in the cult would have to take a bite of that human flesh, and that ceremony would apparently turn the boys into good people. And that was done. That did happen. The way that those kids were treated is horrific. I'm not even really going to go into detail on that because no one in the whole entire world should ever be treated that way, and it honestly just makes me uncomfortable to talk about. But days turned into weeks turned into months. Eventually, Barbara and Clara leave the camp. They go out to go house shopping for a new house for their family. One of the boys, Clara's youngest son, is allowed to leave camp and go home with Barbara and Clara, but the horrible mistreatment just followed him home. He was locked in a dark little storage room underneath the stairs, starved, tied up 24 hours a day for months. Around 5 months passed, and it is May of 2007. A man was at his house working on setting up the baby monitor. Couldn't figure out how to hook it up. Finally sees this horrific image on the screen, does not think that it's a real thing. Brings in his wife. They look at the monitor together and realize that they were picking up a live feed from somewhere else, probably from a house nearby, and they're watching this little boy who is locked up in these conditions somewhere in the neighborhood, so they call the police. The police show up. They are all looking at the footage together. They realize there's music in the background. The police walk outside to see if they can hear the music coming from any of the houses nearby, and they did. So they knew that that footage was coming from that house. The officers walk over. They knock on the door. Clara answers the door, acting stupid. She says she has no idea what the officers are talking about, but they force their way inside. They see the little room underneath the stairs locked with a padlock. They break the lock and they find the little boy inside. He was in horrible conditions, as I'm sure you can guess. He was lying on his own urine and vomit, clearly very unstable. He is finally taken to get medical attention and he has been saved. Authorities also track down his older brother and rescue him from the camp. Clara and Katerina are arrested on the spot, but not Barbara, because police are under the impression that Barbara is a 13-year-old girl named Anna, and they think that she is probably a victim of Clara and Katerina's as well, which obviously could not be further from the truth. But when this is all going down, Barbara is taken into safety as well under a children's home, but then she escapes, and police think that she has been kidnapped by the cult and taken away somewhere. And there was a massive search that took place for this little 13-year-old girl, but that means that her face was on the news, and someone that knew that Barbara was not a 13-year-old girl saw her on the news. They called the police and said, the person that you're looking for is called Barbara, and she's actually in her 30s. And the police are bamboozled, as I'm sure you would be. Using DNA, they were able to confirm that 13-year-old Anna was literally just a made-up character, and she was actually a 33-year-old woman named Barbara. Now this story is in the headlines. People are shocked, but Barbara is still on the run. She's hiding somewhere, and they would not be able to find her for 7 months. Finally, they find her under a fake name, hiding out in Norway. She was posing as a 13-year-old boy named Adam, trying to do the same thing again, but now she's finally under custody, thank God. The boys, now ages 8 and 10, slowly but surely began to recover. They had to be taught how to function like a normal human being again because they hadn't for so long. They had to be taught how to speak again. But once they could, the two little boys were incredibly brave, and they began to tell authorities everything that had happened to them, all of the horrible things that they were put through at the hands of their mother Clara, her sister Katerina, and all of the other cult members. The boys ended up being released to their grandparents. They got custody over them, and they got back in contact with their biological father, which they were very happy about, and all of them would help them heal and give them all of the love that they so deserved. Clara, Katerina, and Barbara all go to trial facing very serious charges. 3 of the other cult members who were at the camp were also facing charges, but not Barbara's father, the leader of the cults, because he ran away and hid from the world. They couldn't find him. In trial, Clara was remorseful. She was crying, saying that she felt bad. Katerina was defending Barbara and blaming everything on Clara. I don't know what her problem is. Barbara was just manipulative and trying to act like, poor me, I didn't do anything wrong. She actually tried to blame the 2 boys, saying that they deserved everything that they got. Clara, Katerina, and Barbara and the 3 other cult members were found guilty on all charges, but this is gonna piss you off. Claire was only sentenced to 9 years. She was released in 2013. Katerina was only sentenced to 10 years. She was released in 2014. Barbara was only sentenced to 5 years. She was released in 2010. And the 3 cult members were only sentenced to 7 years each. They have also all been released. Yeah, no words. This keeps me up at night. But let me know if you have heard of this case before. Let me know what you think. Thank you for spending time with me today. Hope you guys are all having the best day. If not, go do something to make it the best day. I love you all so much, and I will see you in my next video. Massive kiss on the forehead to every single one of you.